at the continuous version of the Hopfield network, but I thought, let me go to slide show more. I thought before going to the continuous network, I think I quickly brushed through it and rushed through it, and they may not be very clear. So before that, I thought I'll back up a little and do a small numerical example that will give an idea of how this network works. Right? Let's take the discrete Hopfield network. Let us say I want to store a pattern which is 1, 1, and -1. So that means it's a 3-neuron network because the pattern has only 3 components. Now, how do you calculate the weights? Weights is equal to, we know that 1 by n into SS transpose. This 1 by n you can ignore actually because, right, this factor, any factor coming into, so let us say sigma of some factor lambda times a vector x, right? Let's say the factor lambda is positive, is equal to sigma of x because that factor doesn't change. This is only signum. It's only depends on the sign. So we don't have to worry about this 1 by n factor. So now how do you calculate the weights? It is equal to SS transpose. So that will give you 1, 1, minus 1, 1, 1, minus 1, minus 1, 1, minus 1, minus 1, 1. Okay, so if you do order product of these two vectors, right, so this actually should be the column vector. By definition, we said all vectors are column vectors. Okay, so you get this matrix. So now if we start from some initial condition, say V0, let the initial condition be slightly distorted version of the pattern. So pattern with some bits off. Okay, so you have, let's say I take 1, 1, 1 as the pattern. So now let us apply the update rule for each of these states and see what happens. So V1, so we know that the update rule is Vi at t plus 1 is equal to this function times sigma Wij Vj at t. Okay, so if we apply this rule, so V1 at t plus 1 will be equal to sigma of W1j, okay, Vj at t. So t here is 0. So that will be equal to sigma of, you need to take the first row. So 1 times 1 plus 1 times 1 plus minus 1, so this third one, times 1. So that gives you sigma of 1, which is equal to 1. Okay, so V1 of 0 is initially 1. So after the update also at time t equal to 1, it is equal, so V1 of 1 is equal to this. So V1 is straightforward. So now if you look at V2 of 1, that will be again sigma of j equal to 1 to 3 and W2j times Vj 0. So okay, so that will be sigma of 1 times 1 plus 1 times 1 plus minus 1 times 1. That will again give you 1. So no change, right? If you go to V3 of 1, so again if you do the same thing, it will be minus 1 because the weight here is minus 1 times 1 plus minus 1 times 1 plus 1 times 1. Okay, so that will give you a sigma of minus 1, which is equal to minus 1. So V3 has gone from 1 to minus 1. Originally it is 1 to minus 1. And you can, if you do the same iteration once more, you will find that V1 of 2 will be 1, V2 of 2 will be 1, and B3 of 2 will again be minus 1. That means no change, right? And also since S is 1, 1 minus 1, so we know that S is equal to sigma of WS, right? Because S will be a stationary state. Once you go to S, you'll never change. Okay, so you see that we started from a distorted version of the pattern. The original pattern is 1, 1 minus 1. We have taken distorted version, which is 1, 1, 1. So as you do this iteration, it landed in the perfect pattern. Okay, so thing is, I've taken a very simple example so that it becomes intuitively clear how this network works. So like I said, life is very simple. If you have only one pattern, it will go there. But only thing is, you will also have the mirror state as stable. But for that, it's a very clean case and it works well. So we can do a demo of that with a slightly larger pattern. So this is a pattern of size 80 squared, right? So that's 6400. The dimensional vector is stored, which is actually an image, but it's converted into a vector and stored in the network. Now this is the original image. Now you give this. Sorry. I hope you can see the video.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I give only a small part of the image, right, which is the top of the head, part of the hat, outline of the hat. And starting with that, the network completes the pattern, right? So that's how it works. Let us take this Mona Lisa example. Again, same principle. Give a small part of Mona Lisa's forehead, and it will complete the pattern. And even noise is added, a lot of noise is added, but still it can recover the perfect pattern. Okay, so that's how the discrete network works, and the continuous network, like I was saying, it's you make both the state a continuous variable. So V is now a continuous variable going from -1 to 1, and there's an intermediate variable, an internal variable of the neuron, which is UI, and then time is also continuous. Therefore, the update is described by a differential equation and not a difference equation. And here also there is an energy function, and you can easily show that this energy function goes down. As this update rule number 1 is applied, right? And if this is applied, this energy function goes down. You can show that because d by dt is always negative or 0. Incidentally, such expression is used to prove stability of dynamical systems in engineering, especially in control systems. Such a function, a lot of work was done by Russian mathematician Lyapunov. So such functions are called Lyapunov functions. Hopfield calls it an energy function because of the analogy with the magnetic materials. So we have seen that that function represents a Hamiltonian, or actually the potential energy of the system, and it tries to go to the minimum of the potential energy. So we call this the energy function in the context of Hopfield network. Okay, so we have seen that if you have a single neuron given by this equation, right, and we have done this long ago when we discussed simple neuron models. So such a neuron has two stable states, one at plus, one at minus, and there's a state at 0 which is just stationary. It's not stable, it's unstable. If it's a single neuron, it's unstable. That means if you start at 0, it will stay there, but if you kick it from there, it will either go to +1 or -1, depending upon which way you push it. Okay, so that is quite simple to study, but if you do the same thing with a 2-neuron system, so where imagine you are storing the pattern S is equal to 1 and -1. So therefore, W will be SS transpose. It will be 1 -1 and -1 1, which is what we have taken here. So if you run this again, you will find that there will be two stable states. One is original stable state, which is 1 -1, And the mirror neuron, mirror state property tells you that if 1 minus 1 is stable, minus 1 is also stable. So in this two-dimensional system, right? So 1 minus 1 is stable. So it's somewhere here. Okay, and minus 1 is also stable. So, right. So that's the property of this system. In addition, the origin now is not unstable. It will be a saddle. Okay, because you go towards the stable states like this, but you can approach the stable state like this. So therefore, origin becomes a saddle. So that is a thing. Okay. So that is how the continuous Hopfield network works. Basically, we are trying to make it more and more realistic, closer to biology, but it's a long way from biology. So first of all, the real world memories, because the real memories, what we call memories and autobiographical memories and memories of facts, and which is what hippocampus is good at, they are much more complicated to understand because they are not conducted at one part in the brain. Those memories are worked out by a huge network in the brain involving cortex and hippocampus, and that story is not complete, and nobody really knows all the pieces of the puzzle. But if you look at specific systems like sensory systems, where some sensory patterns are memorized or are stored, one excellent system where such work is done is the olfactory system or olfactory bulb. A lot of pioneering work in this area was done by Walter Freeman at Berkeley. So in their studies, they found that the olfactory memories are stored in the bulb not as fixed point attractors, because you've seen that the way Hopfield network stores memories is in the form of fixed point attractors. These are stable states, stable nodes. Whereas real memories, as people have found in olfactory bulb, they are not fixed point attractors. They are actually chaotic attractors, where they're not even limit cycles. So they're stored in the form of rhythms. Okay, so that is how real biological memories work. But anyway, so Hopfield network is a good starting point. Let us push it a little bit further and see how you can relate it to memories as they are thought to be stored in hippocampus. So from now on, I'll work towards a theory of hippocampus, which is hippocampal memories, which is quite popular, and a lot of people have developed it over decades. So I also used to like this theory a lot, and I have been teaching it in the course for several years. But off late, I find that I stopped believing this theory. I don't think this theory is quite correct. Okay, and in my lab, we have started developing an alternative theory of hippocampal memories and how hippocampal memories are stored. So first, I'll describe the mainstream theory, how a lot of people are saying it. Then maybe if I have time, I'll also talk about the kind of theory that we are developing. Okay, so let us try to improve the Hopfield network, make it more realistic. And so for that, we need to understand what are the problems that it has. So in the original Hopfield model, the neural activity evolves through time, and weights are calculated in one shot. Whereas you cannot, so thing is, what we did in Hopfield network is you take the pattern and then calculate the weights in one shot, which is quite absurd, right? I mean, it's like suppose you want to learn something for an exam, learn a subject. I mean, tomorrow for the NSEM Comp Neuroscience, you have to learn a lot of things. It's like somebody calculates the synapses that you need to mug up this exam and then just puts it in your brain. And that's not what happened, right? So that's absurd. So you go through the materials over and over and slowly, and some connections change in your brain, and that's how you begin to encode the information necessary to learn the subject. So it will be biologically more plausible if weights can be trained over time. Okay, so that leads us to another extension of Hopfield network, where you have adaptive Hebbian learning. So the weights are adapted slowly through time and not just calculated in one shot. How do you do that? So in this extension, you have two kinds of dynamics. One is the original activation dynamics, which is the same thing as what we have seen before. In addition to this dynamics of U, we also have just a static function which relates UI to VI, and VI is the output, and that is this VI that shows up again in this term, in this equation. So given a set of weights and given some initial condition of the states, the network is evolving according to this equation. Now, in addition to that, we are saying that the weights also have to change, and that change happens by this rule, the second rule, equation 2. Okay, so and also remember that the tau w, which controls the time scale of weight change, and tau a, which controls the time scale of activation change, are rated like this. Tau activation is much smaller, okay, than tau w, which means weights change much slower than the states, which makes sense because if you look at real brain, activation action potentials are changing at a time scale of milliseconds, whereas the synaptic strengths vary over time scale of tens of minutes or hours. Because if you remember the LTP experiments, the synaptic change was occurring slowly after 10 minutes of presentation and stimulation. So you assume that these two timescales are very different. Now it can be easily shown that in this joint system, which has two equations, 1 and 2, right? You can write down a more extended energy function or Lyapunov function, which is given by equation 3 here. And this equation goes to a minimum as equations 1 and 2 evolve. They're evolving at different timescales, but they have jointly a kind of energy function which goes to a minimum. And therefore, when the weights stabilize, right, dwij by dt is equal to 0. Because when the activation stabilize, stop changing, that is dui by dt happens to be 0. Similarly, when the weights stabilize, dwij by dt happens to be 0. And you can easily see that when that happens, this equation, on left side is 0, so wij simply becomes vi vj. You see that this kind of looks like the Hebs rule because what we have done in Hebs rule is take this stored pattern to be stored, and did wij is equal to SISJ. But here what we are saying is, so basically here the idea is that weights don't have access to the external input. So your stored pattern, whatever you want to store, you cannot directly give it to a synapse and say, hey, change yourself according to this pattern. Because the stored pattern is presented as an external stimulus. You present something to the brain and say, hey, memorize this. But you cannot directly take it and use it to change the connections. The connections are influenced by, so if you have two neurons and this is the connections are influenced by the activities of the two neurons. So that is like VI and VJ. These two activities ongoing at the two ends of the synapse can influence the synapse. This is realistic. But the SISJ will be coming as an external stimulus. Okay, SI will go to VI and SJ will go to VJ. So we cannot directly think of, assume that SISJ will influence WIJ. What is more realistic is SISJ is given in the form of stimulus I, and that influences V, right? And that in turn influences W. So it's like this. So this is the brain. Just a toy schematic of the brain, and here is one connection inside that. This is a connection. And this is the ith neuron, this is the jth neuron. So external input is given, SI is given to I, SJ is given to J. Okay, so SI, SJ influence VI, VJ respectively, and VI, VJ in turn influence WIJ together. So that is the sequence you want to follow. Okay, so how do you give this external input? Because we already have provision for that in the equations. Because we said that this equation, the activation dynamics, has an external input I. So this we say is actually S. The stored pattern is given to the network in the form of the external input, and that will be used to train the connection. So this is the kind of a picture we want to develop. So now there's a slight problem here, which is what happens according to equation 2 is Wij is equal to Vi Vj. Okay, not SISJ. Okay, so this is what is actually happening, right? According to equation 2. But what must happen is it must be equal to SISJ, right, which is what is desired. Because if the network is learning, W's are changing so that they are equal to VI, VJ, or on an average, right? It's so suppose initial weights of the network are wrong, the WIJs are some random values. According to this equation, um, and sorry, VI, VJs are some network is some random state, VI, VJ, right? Then according to this equation, WIJ simply learn that correlation VI, VJ, and they simply consolidate. They just grab that and encode that, and that's not good, right? And we need VI, VJs only if they reflect S. So basically, what should happen is, since weights are controlled by VI, VJ, not SISJ, but ideally they must be controlled by SISJ. We need to make sure that S controls V. So that means we want, so we want this. Okay, we want this situation, that is S controls V, or rather V should be equal to S, right? And then V controls W, which is okay, right? Because indirectly S is controlling W. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that V is equal to S? So if you look at this equation, right, so V is just simply a function of UI. So this U is a function of not only I. So let us say the II is nothing but SI. Okay, I'll just make it equal to SI. So V is not only a function of external input I, but it's also a function of this all these internal connections. Because if you are a neuron here, right, you are receiving inputs from other neurons. So this is your output VI, and so this is all VJs coming to you, and you are also receiving input from the external input, which is II. So what I want to know is, when I want to store information, I don't want all this nonsense, this noise coming from my neighbors, all this chatter coming from my neighbors. I would like to tell my neighbors, hey guys, why don't you shut up for some time? I'm trying to understand what this guy is saying from outside. And then once I get it right, I want to use that to train the connections. Okay, in the meantime, I want you guys to chill out and keep quiet for some time. This is what neuron wants to tell the other neurons during storage. Okay, so which means you can easily see that if you think of a situation, if you can arrange a situation where the lateral interactions among neurons become quiet, I don't get any influence from the neighbors, I only get influence from the external input. Then what will happen if you take this equation, right? D tau dui by dt is equal to minus ui. So I neglect this entire thing plus so a into si. Okay, so I'm making I equal to si. So a is just a positive number, and usually it's a large positive number because we need that. I'll tell you why. So then at stability, what happens? Ui is equal to ASI, and Vi is equal to tan h of ui with lambda ui, which is tan h of lambda ASI. Okay, so therefore, so basically, since lambda is high, A is also high, therefore, Vi will be almost equal to SI. Okay, so by making this arrangement, by somehow assuming that the lateral interactions will be weak for some time, I don't get to hear the chatter. So assume that it's possible to do all that. We'll look at the biological implications of all that later. How it's even possible in real biology. So by assuming that, you can have a situation where V's control SI controls VI, and then if you allow your equation to kick in, then what happens is tau Wij, tau dWij by dt is equal to minus Wij plus Vi Vj. So then when this goes to stability, so this goes to 0, that means equal to minus Wij plus Vi Vj. And Vi Vj is equal to SISJ, so therefore Wij is equal to VIVJ, which is approximately equal to SISJ. So this is what we want, and we can get it, right? So during learning, we want to make sure that the lateral interactions don't influence activity much, when external input influences activity. Okay, but during recall, so that is, once the information is stored in the network, you are trying to recall the information, um, then the situation should be slightly different. So let me open another page. So during recall, so recall means information already is stored in the network, right? I'm just recalling it. So Wij, delta Wij, sorry, is 0. So no change in weights. So so then what should happen is, so if in this equation during recall, so how do we recall in Hopfield network? We give the partial pattern as initial condition of Vj, right? And then you just let this equation run, the first equation, this activation dynamics equation 5, and then after some time it will stabilize and it will give you the recall network. And weights are not changed, right, during that time. So when that happens, now you see that external input now should not be active, because even if you are hearing some chatter, right, you should tell that so this is you and this is your state, right, and this is other inputs coming from other neurons, right? There are these weights in Wij, and this is jth neuron, this is ith neuron, and there's external input. Now when you're recalling stuff, you say that, okay, I'm concentrating, I'm trying to recall something, right? And for this, I need, like, to get all the information coming from my neighboring neurons. At this point, I don't want you to say anything and disturb me. Okay, so you lost the external input to keep quiet during this process. Okay, and your latent interaction should become more important, right? Because all the information that you want to recall is now stored inside the weights. So if you want to recall, the only way you can do it is by shutting off the external input and letting the lateral connections becoming active, becoming more important. All right. So the thing is, if you really want to use the network in two modes, that is the storage mode and a recall mode, right? You need to add some more features to these equations, because why did we even arrive at these equations? We said that weight should be adaptive, should vary slowly through time, and you cannot just use external input to set the weights, to calculate the weights in one shot. Realistic. So we made this change. We let weights be adaptive and all that. But the point is, once you have these two equations, mathematically they seem nice. But point is, when you store something and recall something, you need to operate in two different modes, and you need to change some settings in these equations, so that in one setting you store, another setting you recall. Okay, so for that we need to change the equation slightly. So now let us look at these coefficients, which we didn't kind of pay much attention before. This coefficient B controls the relative strength of this entire part, sigma Wij Vj. The coefficient A controls the relative strength of II, and the coefficient C, this is not function C, this is just a coefficient, a multiplicative factor, C, which multiplies this whole thing. Why do we need these coefficients? I mean, you can already guess from what we just discussed. Because during storage, I don't want neighborhood interactions. So this component must be small, external input must be strong, and weights have to change, right? So whereas during recall, I don't want external input, I don't want weights to change, and I want the lateral interactions to be strong. Okay, so let us see if this is clear. Okay, so we said we need the network to operate in two different modes, storage and retrieval. So during storage, the external input must be strong, so A must be large, right? And latent interaction must not be important, so B must be small or ideally 0. And storage must go on. That means weights must be adapted. So therefore, C must be a non-zero number. So that must be large. During retrieval, it's a slightly different story. A must be small. The external input must be kind of blocked or must not have much influence. The lateral interaction must be important. So therefore, B should be a large positive number. And during retrieval, by definition, weight should be we should not change. Weights change only when you're learning something new. Once you're not learning, weight should not change. Okay, so C should be 0. So these are the kinds of things that you want. And so during storage state, to summarize this, you have high A, low B, and high C. During retrieval, you have low A, high B, and 0 C, or low C. Okay, so this is how a systematic study of Hopfield network and its extensions, right, lead you to a network in which you want all these features, and when you shift from storage stage to retrieval stage. Because original Hopfield network didn't bother about any of these things because it's a very artificial model. But as you push to create more and more realistic versions, you automatically arrive at all these things. Because we didn't put much biology in all this. It's only very general mathematical arguments and some common sense viewpoints about the distinction between storage and retrieval. Beyond that, we didn't put any biology. I didn't even say anything about hippocampus. Other than the word hippocampus, I didn't say anything about its anatomy or physiology or neurochemistry and all that. Then you might ask, what's the connection between this and hippocampus? So let me come to that in a second. Okay, just 1 second. Right. So hippocampus is called the scratch pad of memories. Scratch pad means in a scratch pad you quickly jot down something, and once you have a proper version of it, then you go and write that information inside and make a fair copy of it. That's what is the meaning of a scratch pad. So what happens is when you store information, when you coming into the brain from the external world, this information seems to go to hippocampus first, spend some time there, and after that, then I don't know, whatever is important seems to be shipped off from hippocampus to long-term stores in the cortex. And this is the textbook story. If you talk to any hippocampus expert, this is what they will tell you. I'm also just repeating that story. Okay, so therefore you need this kind of this is like a intermediate stopover, right, before memories become long-term memories. And so you need the system for storing memories. If you don't have hippocampus, or if your hippocampus is damaged for whatever reason, then you will have trouble storing memories. Okay, and so that this basic property of hippocampus came through accidentally because of this person called Henry Molaison, who used to be referred to as simply HM in hippocampus literature for a long time, just for sake of privacy. But recently, I think that gentleman died, and now everybody knows what that HM initials mean. So HM had a problem of epilepsy. So epilepsy is a disorder where there is unregulated large activity, synchronous activity spreading over major parts of the brain. And usually it starts at one location, which is called an epileptic focus. And typically that focus is inside the temporal lobe, right? And more specifically somewhere inside hippocampus. The hippocampus is located inside temporal lobe. So you can see that here. This is the this is the temporal lobe, and okay, so inside that you can see the hippocampus. So this is inside, this is depth, right? So so what they do is because in case of intractable epilepsy, where it doesn't respond to medications and all that, people simply used to identify the source of this unregulated abnormal electrical activity in the brain and just surgically remove it. So they were doing it for a long time, and so then when they did it in case of HM had problem on both sides of the brain, in both hippocampi. So, and he had this problem right from his childhood. So, both hippocampi were removed surgically, and uh, and he was okay after the surgery, and he was going about his life. Initially, people thought everything was fine. But slowly, people started noticing that he had serious memory problems, right? Or he suffered from what is called amnesia, so memory loss. In fact, best example for you, because we in India we learn a lot of things from movies, right? Unfortunately, we don't read books. We learn things from movies. One good movie to refer to is the movie Ghazni, where this guy has that short-term memory loss. He cannot store anything for more than 5-10 minutes, so he has to keep on using extra notes and all that stuff. So that's exactly the state of mind of HM. There are two kinds of amnesias. He had both kinds of amnesias. One is retrograde amnesia, that is inability to recall old memories. These memories have already formed long ago, but he has trouble recalling them. Secondly, inability to store new memories. He cannot make new memories, right? So that can be shown in this picture. So this is where the accident has occurred, or lesion has occurred. This is where the hippocampus is damaged or removed or whatever. And right now, the person is here. If the person has retrograde amnesia, what that means is he or she is not able to recall memories from before the lesion. Okay, so long before the lesion, again, you'll have some memories that are available. But up to some point, in sufficiently long time before the lesion, memories are off. In addition, I just want to point out that again, so irrespective of hippocampus, very early on, right after birth, during infancy, so whatever you have experienced, that is not usually memorized. So we don't have memory of what has happened in your infancy. Your parents will tell you some stories. You were like this. This is when you uttered your first word or whatever. Right? All that is just stories you've heard. You yourself don't remember any of that stuff. Okay, and so we don't know the reason. Even Sigmund Freud, the great psychoanalyst, has speculated about why this is happening and all that. But it's a fact. We don't keep memories. We cannot retain memories from very early on, like very from our infancy. So this part is missing for anybody. That's not shown in the picture, but just want to point out that. Now, anterograde amnesia is inability to memorize stuff in future from now on, right? So present time. So after lesion, the person is not able to store anything. And one more thing that happens is in these patients, suppose you're exposed to something, some information. You will retain it. It's not that you don't retain it at all. You might retain it for about 5-10 minutes. After it disappears. So very short-term thing, or rather, I don't know. The memory operates at multiple time scales, starting from milliseconds to decades. So that's problem. That's the reason it's hard to give names to different kinds of memories and different time scales and all that. But that's the range of time scales it operates on. The hippocampal patients can store memories up to about 5-10 minutes. After that, they disappear. So in fact, a typical experience is like a patient is in the hospital, doctor comes to meet him, and so they introduce and they talk and all that. And so the doctor goes away. Doctor comes back again in the afternoon. Again, introduction has to happen afresh, right? Because patient is already forgotten. Okay, that's a typical hippocampal memory loss situation. But if the doctor came back after a few minutes, the patient will remember that. So that is still okay. In fact, there's a movie called 51st Dates. I'm just giving you a lot of reference material because it's easy to learn from movies, unfortunately. So there's a movie called 51st Dates. It's again based on the same thing. This girl has a short-term memory loss, and every day she has to freshly identify her husband. A poor fellow has to, tell her and explain to her who he is every day. Okay, so that is how anterograde amnesia works. And in case of HM, this person had both kinds of memory loss. Okay, so and we also have looked at LTP. I think I'll skip this LTP. We know that if you synapse is initially weak and if you present highest frequency in stimulus on the input side and then depolarize the output side and do this over and over again for about 10-15 minutes, and after that the synapse becomes stronger and the PSP increases after that. And similarly, we give high frequency input on the input side, on the presynaptic side, and give a hyperpolarizing stimulus, a negative current on the postsynaptic side. I do it over and over again. After that, the synaptic strength goes down, and that is called LTT. Okay, so these kinds of information also, a lot of these studies were done in hippocampus, and all this evidence, right, created a strong case for hippocampus as a memory system, right, and so that inspired and triggered a lot of research on hippocampus. So what we'll do is let us take a, okay, let's maybe look at a little bit of anatomy here. So how hippocampus is located? Like I said, it's located inside the temporal lobe, but that's not very interesting. What is more important is the connectivity pattern. How is it connected to the rest of the brain, right? So this whole thing is hippocampus, okay, and it receives input. So this is HC. This is input from the cortex, right? And again, I mean, look at that. Pretty much the whole brain, whole of cortex, parietal, prefrontal, and temporal. Okay. So this is the brain. Prefrontal is all here. Parietal is all here, and temporal. Okay, so that's pretty much whole of cortex. So all these areas project to the hippocampus, not directly but through stages. So these cortical areas project to two regions which are very close to the temporal lobe, somewhere here. Parahippocampal gyrus and perirenal cortex. And these in turn project to entorhinal cortex, which is kind of below, okay, the temporal lobe. And within the, so from, this is still cortical, this is cortex, this is surface. So from there, projections go deeper into the hippocampus, into the temporal lobe, into the hippocampal complex, right? And where you see kind of a loop of connectivity. And from entorhinal, you go to one cluster of neurons called the dentate gyrus. So from there, it goes to another area called CA3. And then from CA3, it goes to CA1, and from there, it goes to subiculum and back to internal cortex. Okay, so you look at this high dimensional cortical input, right, which is huge because it's such huge area, see all these areas. From there, it projects to a smaller cortex. From there, it projects to even smaller cortex. And from there, it goes through a loop and returns back because all these connections are bidirectional. Okay, so input comes from cortex to hippocampus and output of hippocampus goes back to the cortex. A similar pathway. And that's important because if we have a system like that, a huge layer projecting to a small layer and getting feedback, right? In principle, you can use it as a model of associative memory. I mean, how hippocampus does it is a big story, and the story is not complete. The story is not even perfect. But from whatever we know, let us try to read some meaning into these basic anatomical facts and try to make sense out of how hippocampus is so important. How can it contribute to memory operations and so on and so forth. So let us take a small example. Let us assume that I'm trying to store information about a cricket ball, right? I mean, I'm sure you all love cricket. It's a red ball, and fortunately, my pen also has red color. Okay, so cricket ball has several properties. It is red in color, round in shape, and it's hard to feel. Right, because tomato is also red in color and round in shape, but it's not hard. So that way it is distinguished. Right, you can distinguish from tomato. So now you have different cortical areas responding to these different properties. Roundness has to be felt, right, by when you hold the ball in the hand, your fingers, take on a certain configuration to hold that object without dropping it. So that configuration is encoded in your joint angles of the fingers. That information can be processed by what is called your proprioceptive system, right, which measures your joint angles and finds out where your body is in space. right? And so that information about the roundedness of the ball comes to that somatosensory area. Okay, then redness is in the color area. Then hardness is again a somatosensory property. So different cortical areas encode different sensory properties of this object called cricket ball. Now all these areas project to hippocampus not directly but through multiple stages. Okay, so you can think of it as a kind of a CNN, right, where all this project and then to another area, okay, and then finally to this thing called hippocampus. I'm just showing hippocampus as one area, right? And so imagine that. Let me simplify this picture. Let us say I just have one big layer, the input layer, and then one small layer, the output. And let us say there is a neuron here, which represents cricket ball, and which receives input from all these regions. And here I have red color, here I have roundness as a property, and here I have hardness as a property. And these three sets of neurons project to this one neuron, and which represents cricket ball. Okay, so now imagine that these three are active, this neuron gets active. So this is a power connection. So imagine I have feedback connections back to the same areas. This is kind of like what's happening in the real cortico-hippocampal circuitry. Only thing is, real hippocampal cortex circuitry occurs through stages, and I'm just making it simple, just for the sake of argument. So imagine I have redness and hardness alone coming in, right? And let us say those two inputs are sufficient to activate the cricket ball neuron in hippocampus. And once the neuron is activated, it goes back and activates all the neurons. And kind of that fills up your cortical pattern. Right, moment you get these two, okay, you are looking at something red and it feels hard, and therefore, kind of, the idea of cricket ball, comes to your mind, and then you also fill in and say it has to be round, right? So, because when real world objects present themselves, they present themselves as a complex of multiple sensory patterns. There's a pattern which has lots of components, and all those components come together. And when you memorize the object, you memorize it as a combination of all those components of sensory components. And once you give an ID to that pattern, to all those components, that combination of components, and if a neuron which represents that combination gets activated, that by feedback activates all those individual neurons to respond to different sensory components. That's very convenient, right? I mean, so that is how you would imagine that the associative memories work. So then what happens, even if you give a partial pattern, right? Once the neuron gets activated, which represents the full pattern, that in turn will activate the neurons and fill up the gaps, right, and complete the missing gaps. So considering the anatomy of the cortico-hippocampal circuitry, you can imagine that something like this could be happening between cortex and hippocampus. Okay, so that's just a very preliminary sketch of what might be happening in hippocampus. So let us go deeper into this, as maybe in the next class. Okay, so let us stop here. Okay, so let us stop here, and if you have any questions, I'll take it, or we'll continue tomorrow.